November 14, 1998. An overcast Tuesday morning at the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. The air smells of diesel fumes and rotting seaweed. A cold wind whips off the East River, rattling the chain-link fences of the forgotten bonded Zone 4. Two men in heavy canvas jackets stand before a rusted shipping container, number 88X4. It hasn't been opened in 30 years. One man raises a heavy bolt cutter, his breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. He clamps the jaws around the corroded seal. Snap! The metal screams as the doors groan open, revealing a wall of darkness. The smell hits them instantly, a heavy, suffocating stench of old grease, mold, and stale tobacco. They step inside, flashlights cutting through the gloom. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall, wooden crates stacked 10 feet high stretching back into the shadows. The wood is gray with age, stamped with faded black ink. Agricultural machinery destination, Lisbon. One of the men pries the lid off the nearest crate. With a crowbar, wood splinters with a dry crack. He reaches in, pushing aside crumbling straw packing. His hand touches something cold, something hard. He wipes away a thick layer of brown sludge and shines his light on the object. It isn't a tractor part. It is the blue-black steel of a receiver, stamped with a German eagle and the date 1942. Beneath it lies another, and another, a Carabiner 98K. They move to the next crate, British Enfields still wrapped in wax paper. The next, Soviet Mosin-Nagants soaked in cosmoline. This isn't a shipment of farm equipment, it is an arsenal. This container holds over 400 military-grade rifles, and looking down the row of bonded warehouses, the men realize the terrifying truth. There are 300 more containers just like this one. For 3 decades, a ghost army has been sleeping in the heart of New York City. But who put them here? Why were they marked as farm equipment? And why, according to the manifesto tacked to the inside of? The door was this shipment authorized for destruction on October 22, 1968, yet clearly never touched. The man holding the manifesto sees a signature at the bottom. It is a name that shouldn't be there. A name linked to the CIA, the Nicaraguan Contras, and the largest arms dealer in history. The rifles were supposed to vanish. The government said they were melted down. The records said they were scrap metal. But the steel in this crate tells a different story. If you want to see how this story unfolds, hit the like button. To understand why 5 million rifles were left to rot in American ports, we have to look at the man who brought them there. His name was Samuel Cummings. In the 1950s and 60s, Cummings was not a soldier, nor was he a politician. He was a plump, jovial American with a thick pair of black-rimmed glasses and a relentless, toothy smile. He looked like an accountant or a high school history teacher. He lived a quiet life, enjoyed fine wine, and spoke softly. But Samuel Cummings was the merchant of death. As a former CIA weapons specialist, Cummings founded the International Armament Corporation, better known as Interarms. He had a singular vision that would change the American landscape forever. He realized that the battlefields of Europe were littered with the discarded refuse of World War II. Millions of rifles, dropped by surrendering German soldiers, abandoned by retreating Italians, or stockpiled by the British Home Guard, were simply rusting in European warehouses. European governments saw junk, Cummings saw gold. He bought them by the pound. He bought them by the ton. He purchased entire national inventories for pennies on the dollar. Between 1958 and 1968, Cummings unleashed a river of steel upon the United States. He imported vast fleets of ships filled with Mausers, Enfields, Carcanos, and Arasakas. He took out full-page ads in magazines like American Rifleman and Popular Mechanics. The pitch was irresistible, a genuine piece of history, a functioning high-powered rifle, delivered to your front door for $19.95. It was the golden age of surplus. There were no background checks. There were no waiting periods. A 12-year-old boy could cut a coupon out of a magazine, tape two $10 bills to an index card, mail it to Alexandria, Virginia, and 3 weeks later, the postman would hand him a box containing a weapon that had stormed the beaches of Normandy. By 1965, it is estimated that Interarms alone had imported over 2 million firearms into the United States. Other importers, seeing Cummings' success, flooded the market with 3 million more. The American public was enamored. These were cheap hunting rifles, wall hangers, and conversation pieces. The government turned a blind eye. The revenue generated from import tariffs was staggering, and the Second Amendment was interpreted with a casual looseness that defined the era. However, the tide was beginning to turn. While Cummings was counting his millions in his Monaco penthouse, the streets of America were changing. The civil rights movement was in full swing. Urban unrest was growing, and law enforcement began to notice that the cheap, high-powered rifles flooding the mail system were increasingly showing up at crime scenes. Then came the shot that echoed around the world. November 22, 1963, Dallas, Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald, a turbulent drifter, assassinated President John F. Kennedy. The weapon found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository was a Mannlicher Carcano M9138. It was an Italian surplus rifle. It had been purchased by mail order. It cost $19.95. It came from a distributor supplied by the surplus pipeline. Suddenly, the river of steel wasn't a hobbyist's dream. It was a national nightmare. Senator Thomas Dodd of Connecticut launched a crusade. He argued that the unchecked flow of military-grade weaponry into American homes was a recipe for disaster. For 5 years, the debate raged in Washington. The NRA fought back, but the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy in 1968 broke the political stalemate. The Gun Control Act of 1968 was signed into law in October. The act changed everything. It created the federal firearms license system. It banned mail-order gun sales. But most critically for our story, it implemented a strict ban on the importation of military surplus firearms. The door was slamming shut. Cummings and the other importers were given a deadline. December 16, 1968. Any surplus weapons not on U.S. soil and cleared through customs by that date would be banned forever. This triggered a panic unlike anything the arms industry had ever seen. It was a gold rush in reverse. Importers scrambled to buy every remaining rifle in Europe and South America. They chartered freighters, overloaded cargo planes, and bribed customs officials. They needed to get the guns inside the border before the clock struck midnight. But there was a problem they didn't foresee. The U.S. Customs Service was overwhelmed. The ports of New York, Baltimore, and San Francisco became parking lots for ships laden with munitions. Bonded warehouses were filled to capacity. There was physically nowhere to put the guns. As the deadline approached, millions of rifles were stranded in a bureaucratic limbo. They were in U.S. waters, but they hadn't cleared customs. What they didn't know was that a secret order had been issued from the Department of State, an order that would doom these cargoes to a fate far stranger than the scrap heap. The Atlantic Ocean, December 2, 1968. The freighter SS Exford is battling a winter gale 400 miles off the coast of Virginia. In its hold, secured in crates that smell of wet pine and cosmoline, are 40,000 Spanish Mausers and 15,000 Swedish Carl Gustaf rifles. The captain, a grizzled merchant mariner named Elias Thorne, stares at the rain-lashed bridge window. He is pushing the engines to the red line. He has been told that if he doesn't dock in Baltimore by December 14th, he won't get paid. The ship groans as it crests a 30-foot wave, the steel hull shuddering under the strain of thousands of tons of weaponry. Thorne isn't the only one running the gauntlet. Across the Atlantic, a dozen other ships are steaming west at full speed. They are carrying the last remnants of the Wehrmacht, the Red Army, and the British Empire. It is a desperate race against a date on a calendar. Every hour counts. On December 10th, the Exford enters the Chesapeake Bay. The crew is exhausted, the fuel bunkers are down to 15%, but they have made it, or so they think. As they approach the Baltimore docks, the radio crackles to life. The harbor master's voice is tinny and apologetic. Denied, Exford, no berth available. You are ordered to anchor at holding point Charlie. Thorne looks out at the harbor. It is gridlocked. Rust bucket tramps and sleek container ships are packed gunnel to gunnel. The ship volume of incoming surplus has paralyzed the port. The importers, Interarms, Century Arms, Springfield Sporters are on the docks screaming into telephones. They have trucks waiting. They have warehouses rented. But they can't get the cargo off the ships. The weather turns colder. Snow begins to fall on the decks of the waiting ships. Inside the customs houses, the paperwork is piling up in drifts. Every rifle needs a serial number verification. Every crate needs an inspection. The agents are working 18-hour shifts, their eyes red, fingers stained with ink. But for every form they stamp, 5 more arrive. December 15th, 1 day left. A decision is made in Washington. A hard line. The law is the law. If the paperwork isn't stamped by midnight on the 16th, the cargo is illegal contraband. On the docks of New York, a riot nearly breaks out. An importer tries to bribe a customs inspector with a briefcase containing $50,000 cash. He is arrested on the spot. The sun sets on December 16, 1968. At the stroke of midnight, the hammer falls. The river of steel is dammed. The morning of December 17th is silent. The frenzy is over, but the crisis has just begun. There are approximately 800,000 rifles sitting in the holds of ships that never docked. There are another 1.2 million rifles sitting in bonded warehouses, legal limbo zones where goods are stored before customs duties are paid. Because they weren't cleared in time, these 2 million weapons are now illegal to import. They cannot enter the United States commerce stream. The importers are frantic. They have paid millions for this inventory. They can't sell it. They can't move it. The captains of the ships are told to turn around. But where can they go? Europe doesn't want the guns back. The nations that sold them, Spain, Turkey, Finland, have already spent the money. The ships sit at anchor, burning fuel, their crews playing cards on top of crates filled with enough firepower to equip a small nation. Then comes the logistical nightmare. The U.S. government offers a choice. re-export the weapons to a third party or destroy them. Re-exporting takes time to arrange buyers. Destruction is immediate. For the smaller importers, bankruptcy is the only option. They walk away. They abandon the cargo. The U.S. Customs Service is suddenly the owner of massive stockpiles of world-class infantry weapons. But for Sam Cummings and Interarms, this is a chess game. He orders his ships to divert to free ports in Panama and Manchester, England. He spends a fortune on fuel to save his inventory. However, for the millions of rifles already stuck in U.S. bonded warehouses, there is no escape. The doors are locked. Government seals are placed on the hasps. Armed guards are posted at the perimeters. Inside these dark, unheated cavernous buildings, the temperature drops. Condensation forms on the cold steel of the gun barrels. The cosmoline hardens into a wax-like shell. The rifles wait. Months turn into years. The rats move in, nesting in the straw packing. The roofs begin to leak, dripping rainwater onto the crates. And then the strange orders begin to arrive. Trucks show up in the middle of the night. Not military trucks, but unmarked commercial flatbeds. Men in civilian clothes break the seals. They don't take everything. They are selective. They are looking for sanitized weapons, rifles with no import marks, rifles that cannot be traced back to the United States government. A crate of Mausers is loaded, a crate of ammunition. Then they are gone, fading into the highway mist. The official records for these warehouses show inventory static, but the inventory is bleeding. 5 years after the ban, Special Agent David Callas of the ATF stands in a muddy field outside of a scrap metal processing plant in Pennsylvania. He is watching a massacre. But there is no blood, only the shriek of twisting metal. A massive hydraulic shear, affectionately nicknamed Captain Crunch by the workers, is devouring history. Callas watches as a conveyor belt feeds a steady stream of British Enfield No. 4 rifles into the jaws. Crunch. The receiver snaps. The wooden stock splinters into matchsticks. The barrel is bent into a useless horseshoe. The destroyed metal falls onto a growing mountain of scrap. It is a graveyard of craftsmanship. These rifles held the line at El Alamein. They stormed the hedgerows of Normandy. Now they are being sold for $40 a ton to be melted down into rebar for highway overpasses. Callas is there to verify the destruction. His clipboard is thick with forms. Lot 44 be 5,000 units, destroyed. He checks the box. But Callas is a gun guy. He knows what he's looking at. And as he watches the conveyor belt, he notices something odd. Every fifth crate is skipped. The workers on the line, rough men with grease-stained faces, act quickly. They pull a crate off the belt and slide it behind a stack of crushed cars. Callas steps forward to intervene, but the foreman, a burly man with a scar on his cheek, steps in his path. Just sorting the brass from the steel, agent, the foreman says. His eyes are hard. Safety regulations. Callas knows it's a lie, but he also knows that the company running this destruction contract has high-level clearance. He steps back. He checks the box. Destroyed. This scene plays out across America throughout the 1970s. The Great Melt claims millions of firearms. The official narrative is that the surplus problem has been solved. The guns are gone. But in the shadows, the river of steel has simply gone underground. Life in America moves on. The Vietnam War ends. Disco rises and falls. The Cold War freezes over again. The hysteria over mail-order rifles fades from the public consciousness. Sam Cummings continues to operate interarms, but he shifts his focus to international military sales. He lives in a fortress in Switzerland, a king in exile. Meanwhile, the bonded warehouses in Brooklyn, New Jersey, and Virginia sit silent. They are forgotten by the public. The paperwork regarding their contents is filed away in damp basements of federal buildings, where ink fades and staples rust. In these warehouses, the phantom inventory gathers dust. Some of these buildings are sold to new owners who are told, "Don't open the back room, it's government property." False walls are erected to hide the stockpiles. In a warehouse in Alexandria, a drywall partition is built right in front of a stack of 10,000 Argentine Mausers. A carpet company moves in and stacks rolls of shag carpet against the false wall, completely unaware that an arsenal lies 3 feet away. Decades slip away. 1980, 1990. The investigators who originally tracked these shipments retire. Some die. The institutional knowledge of exactly where the guns are begins to evaporate. The discrepancies in the destruction logs, the missing pages, the math that doesn't add up, are buried under new bureaucracy. But there are those who remain suspicious. A retired customs inspector named Frank Halloway keeps a journal. He tracked the tonnage of scrap metal leaving the destruction sites in the 70s. He calculated the weight of the wood versus the steel. The numbers never balanced. By Halloway's calculations, at least 4,000 tons of steel were missing from the scrap records. That's the equivalent of nearly 1 million rifles. They didn't burn them, Halloway tells his wife late one night, tapping his cigarette on the kitchen table. They stole them, or they hid them. You don't just lose 1 million rifles. Halloway writes letters to congressmen. They go unanswered. He visits the old warehouses, but is turned away by private security guards. The trail is cold. The secret, it seems, will die with the men who orchestrated it. Or so they thought. What Halloway didn't know was that the government hadn't just forgotten the guns. They were saving them for a rainy day, and in the 1980s, in the jungles of Central America, it began to rain. Return to November 1998, the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. The team of investigators, led by a forensic accountant named Sarah Jenkins, has set up floodlights inside the warehouse. Jenkins is not a gun expert. She is an auditor. She is looking for tax evasion assets. She has no idea she has stumbled into a time capsule. They have cleared the first layer of the container, the farm machinery cover. The broken crates of tractor parts were just a facade, a mere 2 feet deep. Reveal 1, the preservation. Behind the tractor parts, the team finds the first true layer. It is a wall of crate wood, remarkably preserved. The lack of oxygen in the sealed container has halted the decay. They pry open a crate marked Item 7B. Inside, packed in heavy grease paper, are US M1 Garand rifles. These aren't just any Garands. These are Lend-Lease returns. The serial numbers indicate they were manufactured by Winchester in 1943, shipped to Britain during the war, and then sold back to the U.S. surplus market in 1967. Jenkins picks one up. It is pristine. The wood is dark walnut, unmarred. The action cycles with a heavy metallic clack slide. It is a collector's holy grail, worth thousands of dollars on the modern market. But why are they here? These could have been sold legally if they were US-made reimports. Reveal 2, the sterilized weapons. They move deeper into the container, climbing over the stacks. they reach the middle section. Here the crates change, they are unmarked, no stamps, no destination. They open once. Inside are Soviet AK-47s, milled receivers, Type 2s and Type 3s. These are fully automatic weapons, highly illegal. But the strange part is the markings, or rather the lack of them. The factory stamps on the trunnions have been ground off. The selector markings have been filled in and stamped over with gibberish. These guns have been sterilized. A ballistics expert on the team, a man named Miller, examines them under a magnifying glass. "This is CIA tradecraft," he whispers. "Sanitized for deniable operations. You drop these into a jungle, and if the enemy captures them, they can't prove they came from America." Miller checks the date codes on the ammunition crates stacked next to them. 1984. The timeline shifts. The container was sealed in 1998. The rifles are from the 1960s surplus ban, but the ammo is from the mid-80s. Someone accessed this stash long after the 1968 ban. Reveal 3, the paperwork. The team reaches the back wall of the container. There is a metal filing cabinet, rusted shut, welded to the floor. They drill the lock. Inside, the papers are brittle, crumbling at the edges. Jenkins pulls out a file folder labeled Operation Tipped Kettle. She reads the manifests. It is a smoking gun. The documents detail a triangular trade route. The surplus rifles, the ones supposedly destroyed in the 70s, were moved into these bonded warehouses. From there, they were secretly withdrawn and shipped to Israel. In exchange, the Israelis provided captured Soviet PLO weapons to the U.S. And where did those weapons go? The manifest lists the final destination, Honduras/Nicaragua border. These mail-order antiques, these vanished rifles, were being funneled to the Contras. But container number 88X4 held something that changed everything. In the bottom drawer of the cabinet, they find a ledger. It contains a list of serial numbers, thousands of them. Jenkins runs a finger down the list. Next to each number is a status update. Sent to Angola. Sent to Afghanistan. Sent to El Salvador. And then a terrifying entry for the remaining inventory. Release to domestic market, pending legislation. The plan wasn't just to use them for foreign wars. The plan was to wait until the laws changed, or until the heat died down, and flood the American streets with them once again. They weren't destroying the guns, they were banking them. Miller looks at the rows of silent rifles. "They treated them like currency," he says, his voice hollow. "Gold fluctuates, stocks crash, but a rifle is always worth a life." The bonded warehouse wasn't a graveyard, it was a savings account. The discovery in Brooklyn was just the tip of the iceberg. As the investigation widened, it revealed the true scale of the Great Disappearance. The 5 million mail-order rifles that vanished after 1968 didn't just evaporate. They became the dark capital of the Cold War. This discovery reshapes our understanding of the 1968 Gun Control Act. Historically, we viewed the act as a domestic safety measure, a way to keep guns out of the hands of assassins and criminals. And while that was the public intent, the unintended consequence was the creation of a massive, off-the-books arsenal for the intelligence community. By banning the commercial sale of these weapons, the government inadvertently created a stockpile of untraceable hardware. If the U.S. Army supplied M16s to rebels, it was an act of war, But if surplus, Mausers, and sterilized AKs showed up, that was just the chaos of the black market. This explains why, throughout the 1970s and 80s, vintage World War II weaponry kept appearing in conflict zones where it had no business being. It explains why Rhodesian Bush warfighters were seen carrying pristine German K-98s. It explains why the Mujahideen in Afghanistan were photographed with British Lee Enfields that looked like they had just left the factory. They were our guns. The river of steel had been diverted from the mailboxes of American citizens to the battlefields of the Third World. The investigators like Frank Holloway, who claimed the destruction numbers were faked, were vindicated. The Captain Crunch machines had indeed destroyed millions of junk rifles, rusted, pitted, useless weapons. But the Grade A stock, the mint-condition history, that was quietly pulled off the line and stashed away. The implications are chilling. The golden age of surplus ended for the American consumer, but it began a golden age of covert logistics for the state. Even today, the echo of this network remains. When the Brooklyn warehouse was fully cataloged, thousands of rifles were eventually destroyed for real. But thousands more were quietly sold to museums or deactivated. However, the files suggest that at least 3 other major stockpiles, listed in the manifests as Site B and Site C, were never located. Somewhere in the American Midwest, or perhaps in a rusted hangar in the Mojave Desert, there are likely tens of thousands of Mausers and Mosins still sitting in the dark, waiting for a war that ended 80 years ago. Among the cold steel and political intrigue, the team in Brooklyn found something that brought the story back to its human core. Tucked into the buttstock of a Kar 98K rifle, hidden beneath the metal butt plate, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a photograph. The photograph, sepia-toned and cracked, showed young German soldier, no older than 19, standing with his arm around a girl in a sundress. On the back, in faded pencil, was written, "Hans and Sophie, Munich, 1943, wait for me." This rifle wasn't just a unit of inventory. It wasn't just a piece of covert currency. It was Hans's rifle. He had carried it. He had cleaned it. He had likely died with it. It had been captured by an American GI, sold to a broker bought by Sam Cummings, shipped to Virginia, banned by Congress, slated for destruction, saved by the CIA, and locked in a box for 30 years. The investigators tracked down the name. Hans Weber, killed in action, Normandy, June 1944. There is a profound sadness in this discovery. These weapons were forged to kill, yes, but they are also artifacts of human suffering and survival. When the family of Hans Weber, now living in Bavaria, was contacted, they didn't want the rifle. "Let it sleep," his niece said. "Too much blood." But she asked for the photo. When the courier delivered that small, crinkled piece of paper to her, she wept. It was the only image of her uncle that had survived the war. The rifle, an instrument of death, had protected a memory of love. Sometimes, objects carry more weight than the history books can hold. We look at a rusted rifle and see metal. We see legislation. We see a commodity. But beneath the cosmoline and the bureaucracy, there is a pulse. The 5 million mail-order rifles of the 1960s were a phenomenon that will never be repeated. They were a bridge between the chaos of the World War and the modern era of regulation. They were the river of steel that flowed into the homes of America, and then, just as quickly, flowed back out into the shadows. In the end, the Brooklyn warehouse was cleared. The rifles were sent to the shredder, finally meeting the fate they cheated in 1968. As the grinder roared to life, echoing the sound of the bolt cutters that opened the container, the steel screamed one last time. Sparks flew, bright and hot, returning the weapons to the earth from which they came. The mystery is solved, but the feeling remains. Somewhere in a grandfather's attic, or behind a false wall in a forgotten warehouse, the past is still waiting to be found. Comment which mystery we should investigate next.